From the studios of the Department of Communication in Phillipsburg, welcome to Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvaria Jacobs.
Welcome to Prime Minister Talks. Today, I have a very interesting discussion that will be taking place with Mr. Jason Rogers. Most of you may know him as a lawyer, but of course I'm going to allow him to introduce himself and all of the different hats he's worn that make him the prime guest for this segment. Today we'll be talking about electoral reform. During the last couple of weeks, you may have filled out our survey, and if you haven't, please go to our Facebook pages, government page, as well as mine, and do your duty to make sure your voice is heard. We've been having a lot of chit-chat on Facebook and all about the place, in the newspapers, and especially when there's a little uproar. But the Ministry of General Affairs has been busy trying to get to a place where we can make the necessary changes. We don't feel, however, we can do it without the public's input, but I also believe educating the public is part of that. And so that's why I've invited you this day. Hi, Jason. Welcome to Prime Minister Talks. It's your first time, eh?
This is indeed my first time, and thank you for having me, Prime Minister. And as you said, it's part of educating the public, and I'm really honored to be able to be a part of this and educating the public.
Definitely.
On different things.
So you're a lawyer.
Yes.
Introduce yourself as to why I might have called you here today. Let them know why.
Right. So yes, I am indeed I'm an attorney. I'm practicing. I'm an attorney now. Since 2007, I've been practicing law on St. Martin. And prior to that, I was actually teaching at a law school in Amsterdam, where I taught different subjects such as criminal law, administrative law, and I was also a supervisor on various projects such as European law and also administrative law as well.
Wow.
So that's my basically what I do as a lawyer.
That's your background,
That's
but
my
you've
background.
also served for several years at the Main Voting Bureau.
That is correct. I served as chair of the Central Voting Bureau for since 2014, actually. I started in 2013 as a regular member, and that did not last it long because soon after that, then I was actually appointed as chair. And until last, was it? No, it was
2020?
2021, actually. We're in 22 now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, so with that experience, I figured you'd be a good candidate to explain to the people of St. Martin a little bit about, we talk about reform, but before you can reform, you need to know what is.
Correct.
Can you give a very short synopsis of how our electoral system is currently working?
Well, short.
As short and as simply as possible.
Well, it all starts with the decree, with the national decree, whereby the Prime Minister, which she or he would then sign the national decree whereby election is actually called, and that is signed by the governor as well. And once that information, that national decree has been forwarded to us, we start hitting the ground running. I say we as if I'm still part of the of the bureau, but the Central Voting Bureau starts hitting the ground running and making the necessary processes. So what you do is you reach out to the various political parties that are registered, because based on the law, they need to be registered at the Electoral Council. And that should also be 6 weeks prior as well. And so you start getting rallying them in terms of getting them together with information, whereby you give them necessary information to make sure that that the process goes as smooth as possible. In addition to that, you also have the various stakeholders that you need to get in touch with. The civil registry is definitely one of our main stakeholders in this that helps us with a lot of different preparations of that. Also, we have the police, but we also have public works and everybody else that we get in touch with. And
That's
to make
leading
sure
up to the election itself.
That's leading up to the election itself, yes, correct.
Right. So the election is one thing, but the system that then puts into place how we are elected, how members of parliament are elected, how do you see, how can you explain our literal electoral system?
Well, how it is that, you go to the polls, you vote, and after that, it is so that based on the results, a number of seats are allotted to the different parties based on the votes that they get, and then the whole ball start running. How it works is that then you have the credentials of the members of parliament, whereby they will have to submit a number of documentation, and the documentations that are submitted that, you get to make sure that it's actually in order, and then you forward that on to the President of Parliament, where you indicate to the President of Parliament, these are the persons that have been elected. You have the process verbal, and you also send the various documentations to the President of Parliament, and then they will then have to do their thing.
Okay, so I think the discussions throughout the community is that party versus individual situation. So currently, you have to be a party to be elected.
Correct.
So an individual at this time in our system cannot just decide, okay, I am running for parliament. I, Silveria Jacobs, I'm going to the Electoral Council and I am registering as a party, and Silveria Jacobs is running. Can that happen?
So is indeed what you said, or we have a party system whereby the party is the one that actually is running, and is actually, they have a number of persons on the list, and that party needs to be registered. You can have a party of just one person
Yes,
as well.
but the person itself
The
can
person,
be the party.
no, it is a party, because that's so clear in the law that it must be a party, that the party needs to be registered at the Electoral Council. But Silveria Jacobs herself cannot go and, participate on her
In
own
an election without a party.
She has to be part of the party. And then, of course, then you have the whole discussion that we have in the community nowadays when individuals decide, you know what, I no longer align with the party's mission, and I would therefore go and declare myself independent, if that should be allowed. And the whole discussion is,
Right.
do you go with the seat or not?
Right.
And there's where,
This is where the reform is
comes
needed.
into. Look, I feel, Prime Minister, is that we need to have a debate in our country as to what do we actually want, what system basically works for us. I've said it a number of times. We have actually taken over the system of the Netherlands Antilles that was taken over by the Netherlands.
Right.
Now, it works for the Netherlands, it worked for the Netherlands Antilles, it works for Aruba, and it's working for Curacao too. The question is it sufficient for St. Martin? Now, that discussion we need to have, a debate we need to have in a community to see, hey, do we need to, because it's working with, that's a system with the former Netherlands Antilles, do we need it for St. Martin too? Maybe we need to have another discussion in terms of what best works for us as a country on St. Martin.
And that's exactly what this is all about. That's
Well, that's
what the
good.
survey is about. And you are actually our first guest to bring that information so that we can get that real debate started. So that's the end of our first segment. And if you're interested in this very riveting topic, please come back. This is Prime Minister Talks.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Silveria Jacobs.
This hurricane season, make a list of supplies and assemble them before a hurricane strikes. Have enough food and water for each person for at least 3 days. Fill your prescriptions and have medicine on hand. Radios, batteries, and phone chargers are also must-haves. Gas up your vehicle and have cash on hand. For more information, visit stmartingov.org/hurricane. And for the latest coronavirus COVID-19 guidelines, visit stmartingov.org/coronavirus. This public service announcement is brought to you by the government of St. Martin.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Silveria Jacobs.
Welcome back to Prime Minister Talks. We're talking about electoral reform. Make sure you go out and check our survey on Facebook. We would like to get as many persons to give input because that is what we're busy with as a Ministry of General Affairs. Jason, we have as ministry embarked on providing a framework so that we can get a campaign going on electoral reform. It's going to be multi-pronged. Part of it is data collection, that is with the survey, but we'll also be going into the communities and having these kind of, let's call it community discourse, town hall meetings to have the community maybe have a presenter like yourself or someone else with a background, explain a certain aspect, and the community get engaged. So they are more aware. Of course, based on the survey results, we'll know what topics then we'll be going into. But you started talking about, we just took over what was there. Basically, what we have now is what was there. We elect 15. Before, we used to elect island council members who could then be also executive council members simultaneously. Now we have a separation. We elect 15 members of parliament, depending now on, it could be more, they say, depending on the population. But those 15, a majority decide then on who sits as government, the executive branch.
Correct.
Support to be separate. have their own responsibilities, and Parliament holds government accountable to execute. Yet, as you mentioned, you have to have a party to get elected, but you can also still go independent. You then end up having a mandate as a party. And I think that is where some of the imbalance, some of the, how you call it? The fragility of parliaments then lead to the breaking of governments. So what do you think are some of the things that can be done to change that?
Right. Well, first, I do think that it starts with a strong party program and everybody align themselves into that with that program, and that the party functions as a party, right? What I also think is that to a certain extent that we, or and I say we, being part of the community as well, part of St. Martin, we also need to grow towards political maturity as well. What I think it's important, Prime Minister, is that we reach a point whereby we say, you know what, we need to work as much as possible for as a stability of the government, which is also stability of a country. And in doing so, I'm saying irrespective to any government. So what system would actually work best for St. Martin, as we discussed briefly in the previous segment. Now, I think that's a discussion we need to have, and we need to see what model suits best for St. Martin. Now, there are various models that have been discussed before. I mean, we can also look at whether or not we want to talk about a district model, for instance, whether we already divide the country up in a number of voting districts. We can say, well, you know what, just for the purpose of discussion, would a district stencil, a district model then promote stability of the government then? That's a discussion that we need to have. Let's say you've divided St. Martin up in a number of districts. You have District Cold Bay, you have St. Peter South Reward, you have Middle Region, the different ones, and that depending on how many persons are living in that district district actually provide a number of parliamentary representatives into Parliament. And let's say if you're hailing from Cold Bay, you have persons that are postulating themselves for Cold Bay only. Then if that person, if he or she does not perform during her 4-year tenure as a parliamentarian or his 4-year tenure as a parliamentarian, then you're going to actually have to say, you know what, I do not agree with how that person performed, so therefore I'm going to look for somebody else within Cold Bay. So then you might have a little bit more of accountability there, but also important is the stability. Again, I'm not saying that this is what we need to do, but we can have that discussions. But there are also other models that we can look at. So I do applaud the efforts of the Ministry of General Affairs to say, you know, we go out into the community and speak with the people, but also look to the surrounding neighboring islands to see what their model is and what works for them. But there's definitely a discussion needs to start, and that we have that debate to see what best suits St. Martin as well.
Okay, so I think definitely we could look at, I think in this segment, what other models are out there. We have ours, where we have the elected parliament that appoints the ministers. One of our questions on the survey is, would you support, because this was a proposal by His Excellency, the late acting governor, Reinhold Groeneveld. He actually put forward a document saying that besides electing the 15 members of parliament, that the electorate should also elect the prime minister. And that from the prime minister, the executive branch is chosen, not from necessarily the parliament's sec.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that model? And besides a district model and this model that we have now, that's a third model, what other models exist within, let's say, our region? Because I don't think we could look at big countries and say, let's do what they do.
No, absolutely not. I must say I heard about that paper that the late Mr. Groeneveld actually, that he wrote, but I do not know exactly the details into it. So I would want to know more about the details and under what circumstances, criteria that he put in place to safeguard a smooth process in that whole electing a prime minister. Exactly. I am not opposed to it. Like I said, I think in order to promote stability, you need to actually be open to have a discussion with different models to see which one best worked. And again, in tandem with that, you also need to engage the people as well to see, because at the end of the day, the people, the electorate, they have to have trust in the system.
Correct.
So it's good to have them engage as well.
All right. So, sorry to cut you off, but you mentioned a couple of things that I wanted to touch before this segment, and you mentioned having a strong party ideal, having political maturity, and having a look at the models. We talked a little bit about the models, but in terms of, especially since our current system is built on a party system,
Correct.
but then once elected, it's basically an individual system. Is that an area in which the change needs to happen if we want to maintain the current system?
Well, yeah. So I think, though, that is not only about prior to election with the engagement of the party with its members, but also after. That engagement needs to continue. So you keep them aligned. And I think if a party has a mission, it has a program, that it should not only be relevant when election is on, but also thereafter, all through the years. And that, you have your members, your candidates that you had running with you and the different members, you keep them aligned with that whole program and just not only during elections. So that may kind of help fill the gap that you were talking about, Prime Minister.
Right. We're running out of time for this segment. I'm getting caught up, I'm getting my signals. So what we'll do is we'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll come to the last segment. But don't worry, there will be many more chances for you to learn more about electoral reform. Come back now.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Hello. As previously mentioned, the Ministry of General Affairs is diligently working to prepare for electoral reform. But we cannot do that without your input. As such, as Prime Minister, we have issued a survey to get the input of the population on where we would like to go with electoral reform. Thereafter, we'll be having some town hall meetings where you again will have that opportunity to give feedback and answer questions, as well as ask questions on this topic to get clarity on where we are and where we want to go. So it will only take a few minutes, and it will be posted on our Facebook page. That's the government's Facebook page, as well as my Facebook page. And I do encourage you to let your voice be heard, go to the survey, fill it in, and be a part of the change we want to see in St. Martin.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.
Welcome back to Prime Minister Talks. We're talking about electoral reform. Is it necessary? Can you actually legislate? What is going on in St. Martin?
Yes.
Jason,
Prime Minister.
Legislation is your thing. So do you think that changing legislation will change the culture or change what has been happening with instability on St. Martin?
Well, not necessarily, Prime Minister. There are a number of things that you can actually legislate, but what you cannot legislate is, of course, the will of the people, political maturity. That's something you cannot. You need to either have it in you or not. You either want to do it or you do not want to do it. However, what you can legislate, Prime Minister, is if we work with the existing ordinances that we have, the national ordinances, that the little, gray areas that we have in there, that we legislate that. Let's say, for instance, we have where we still go to the polls and we have the black curtain behind us. Do we still need that? That's a whole discussion that you have, people that are not in agreement with it. Some people say, yes, we still need to have it. The whole thing's with the telephone, the cell phones going into the voting booth with that. Now, that is not legislated. And should you legislate it, there are a lot of people that have different opinions where that is concerned. A number of things, too, is in terms of the electorate, because if you look at the kiesverordening, we talk about ingezetenen. Those are persons that are basically inhabitants of St. Martin. That those are, you need to be an inhabitant, you need to have a Dutch nationality, you need to be 18 years of age at the date of election in order to vote. Now, there we have different discussions whether or not we should expand the electorate. And there were discussions whether or not that students that are studying in the Netherlands, should they be given voting rights as well. Now, I feel that if you want to go and expand the electorate, Prime Minister, that you just cannot do, I do understand expanded to the students in the Netherlands, that is very much discriminative, because you also have a bigger group category of people that are living abroad as well, that you also have to give them that right. So, for instance, it could be people that are studying or that are living in the Netherlands, you can say up to a period of 10 years, for instance. The Netherlands also have that requirements for their second chamber elections as well. Aruba, if I'm not mistaken, was having that discussion. I'm not sure if they implemented it, that Arubans that are living abroad for a period of up to 10 years, that they were looking into giving them the voting rights as well. I'm not sure if that's implemented. The idea, the rationale behind of that is that you send students abroad and they have they study usually for 4 years. Some people will do another study that brings you up to a good 6 or 7 years, more or less, and then the working experience, and then you come back, and then you can contribute to your island. And would you want to give those persons then the opportunity to vote as well? Now, if you do that, Prime Minister, of course, there are a number of things that go into place with that. The organization of the election. You need a voting bureau in all those different countries, whether it's the Netherlands, Aruba, Curacao, the United States, where they're living. You need
or an office. I mean, we have our St. Martin House.
Well, you need to be able to man it too.
Yes, you have to manage.
You be able to man it, and how do you get the voting cards out to them as well? Those different things.
Another thing. That's a little archaic as well.
Exactly.
So there's a lot.
With that too, if you expand the electorate, you have the Constitution that also says the amount of seats that are in Parliament. And the Constitution, the kiesverordening, it speaks about inhabitants. But now, if you're going to expand it
affects that.
It affects that as well.
Or you can decide it doesn't. Because they're
exactly.
Not actually living
Once you legislate it. But then again, there are a number of things. If you're talking about electoral reform, it's not only the kiesverordening, but we're talking about certain parts of the Constitution that will need a change. And then we're looking at that 2/3 majority within, you have to go within the kingdom as well to get that 2/3 majority as well.
Okay.
So
that's a whole, I think, separate topic that we would have to have an hour for.
Oh, yeah.
This is the initial discussion.
Right.
So I want to touch a little bit on the whole political maturity thing, what we as party leaders have to do pre-election and during the whole time. We touched on it a bit in the break. It got very exciting. The team wanted us to make sure that we got that out there.
Yeah.
How do you feel, or can we express here to the general public listening, what role the party has to play in keeping political stability?
That's a very loaded question. I think that parties, again, you have your party's ideals, which we talked about, is not so much different from per party. Like we indicated that if you look at it, the U.S. with the Democrats and Republicans, that's different. Even in the Netherlands, you have left and right. We don't really have that here. So that's one thing. But again, having ideals is very important. But I think it's the obligation of the party to engage their members and also say, well, listen, we have, this is our ideals, but these are our requirements. We hold ourselves in high esteem as a party. This is our direction. And also have their members be accountable as well.
Okay.
So I think that's one part of the whole political maturity. And, once that is promoted, not only one party, but throughout the whole party, I think then that becomes then the tending note, so to speak.
Okay. So that's an area where definitely we need to grow. How do you think the Lynch Law, since legislation is, we call it the Lynch Law, where we move from the party deciding on who the representatives would be by order of the list to the voters deciding who would be the representatives within a party?
That's a good question as well. I think, though, that from a whole constitutional and human fundamental right perspective, I would agree with persons deciding to choose who they want, because based on our Constitution, but also international treaties, you have what we call actief and passief kiesrecht, and the right to vote, but also the right to postulate yourselves. Now, I think where that is concerned, that the people choose their representatives, I subscribe to that idea. The question is, does it work within our system?
Good question.
In terms of, for more stability then, that's what I'm referring to. I do tend to think that if we look at history, it seemed where that was the case, it was more the case where the parties were indicating who their representatives are on the order of the list. I think that probably would have been a little bit more stable back then. However, don't forget the time was different than nowadays and now as well. So there are a lot of variables that you have to take into consideration. But I think evaluating everything, not leaving anything out, is the way we want to go in order to have a public debate for us to form our own model.
Unfortunately, the time has come. We're running out of time. I think it's important that the people of St. Martin, at least, hopefully you're triggered by this conversation, triggered in the sense of let's talk some more, that you're going to fill in our survey. Listening to you, I'm like, we sound like we need another survey. Some of the things that you were bringing up. So I think the discussions that we're going to have moving forward with the various stakeholders will be very interested indeed. And I want to thank you for your contribution today. Is there anything else you would like to, like in 10, 15 seconds, say to wrap it up?
No, I do think that, electoral reform is something we need to have. I think there should not be anything left off the table where electoral reform is concerned, because I think that should also contribute to the stability of governance, which is ultimately in the interest of a stable country.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Rogers, for joining us here on Prime Minister Talks. To the people of St. Martin, stay tuned. This is just the beginning. We are definitely working toward electoral reform, and not just because we think it's necessary as a government, but because we hear the cry of the people and we want to have your participation. Until the next segment, this has been Prime Minister Talks.
Prime Minister Talks with Honorable Prime Minister Sylvia Jacobs.